professor in the African and African Diaspora Studies Department. Her teaching and research explores the intersections of law, race, and nationalism in the U.S. empire building in Latin America and the Caribbean. She's particularly concerned with the role that law has played in the creation of the relationship between the United States and its island colony of Puerto Rico. She has received fellowships for her in support of her work from the Ford Foundation, the Puerto Rican Studies Association, the Institute for Global Law and Policy at Harvard Law School and the University of Texas at Austin. Monica.
Thank you. Thank you, Cesar, and thank you everyone for being here. Very gratified to see so much interest in this topic that we spent a lot of time thinking about and thinking no one is listening. So I just have 3 points that I want to highlight in terms of the way that law operates, has been operating in this context, limits, really creates barriers to a speedy recovery, the movement of people and goods, right? All of the kind of catastrophic things that we've been witnessing since Maria and Irma hit, and the ways that law is sort of a cudgel within those contexts. And there are many things, and actually Francisco just mentioned some in terms of health law, and Carlos mentioned things in terms of environmental law, right? So these things sort of permeate every possible aspect of federal law on the island, and the ways that local law can fit in the gaps that federal law will leave. But I want to talk about 3 sort of big overarching legal conundrums that impact the current situation and the potentials for moving out of those situations. And one is the pervasive and everlasting unincorporated status of Puerto Rico. And this term, unincorporated, was a creation of a legal case from 1901 in which a Supreme Court, a very divided Supreme Court, is sort of fumbling in the dark for what to do with the new territory of Puerto Rico and the other territories that the U.S. acquired after the Spanish-Cuban-American War. And so you really see in this legal cases the court grappling with how do we keep these territories for the benefit, the economic benefits that they could provide the United States, but really put on a pause on what to do with the people that live there. And so it's in that kind of context that the unincorporated territory is born, and it isn't in the majority decision of the court. It's actually in a separate opinion of one of the justices who disagreed with the legal reasoning of the majority. And so it's almost a throwaway, you would think, in his sort of thinking, well, it's not actually a question of territoriality and does the flag go where we go. It's this language in the treaty between the U.S. and Spain that doesn't say this territory will be incorporated. And this is some very old language that actually was created to address uninhabited islands in the 19th century that the U.S. wanted to extract minerals and guano from. So I say all of that to say that Eduardo brought up this question of conquered land, and it's really a problem of this 20th century moment that we're now forced to grapple with and attempt to find solutions from a situation, a kind of a legal entity that could not have foreseen this moment. So unincorporation is the kind of foundational problem. It means that Puerto Rico was never really intended to be a part of the U.S. It means that it can always sort of legally be something outside of the U.S. As a geography. People obviously can move here and have different rights, but being on the island means that you are disenfranchised from the nation and federal, all of the sort of federal rights that we here are privy to. So that's the major, I think, foundational piece. And then the other thing that you've probably read a lot about in the last 3-4 weeks is this question of the 1920 Jones Act and what that means for the island. And so the Jones Act of 1920 is this, again, another quirk of our 20th century, early 20th century moment that was intended to be a protectionist measure to ensure that goods that were shipped to Puerto Rico and to Hawaii, this law still applies to Hawaii as well, that they had to come on U.S. flag-bearing ships. so that the U.S. would carry the benefit, right? So it would U.S. corporations would receive the benefit of being able to ship to these territories. And the practical effect of that has been that since 1920, everything is more expensive in Puerto Rico, and everything is sort of more difficult to get to because it has to come from the U.S. Even if it makes more pragmatic sense for it to come from a neighboring island, it has to first go from that island to the United States, be changed, ships, and then sent back, making everything and some things prohibitively expensive. So I bring that up because when we consider what this moment and what can and can't get to the island and how it can get there, fuel, right, as we just discovered, is one that's hugely important, and it's always expensive, but even more difficult to get now, that it has to still come from U.S.-bearing ships. So what we've seen, too, is various foreign countries in Latin America who have offered aid and have had to either not bring it or wait for that brief abrogation of the Jones Act that was implemented. I will admit that I don't know past those 10 days what has happened, what will happen. I think there was a moment where everyone was very, very interested in talking about the Jones Act, and now I don't see that. Right, yeah. So I know that a lot of ships did arrive. No ships arrived.
No, just one ship.
One ship arrived.
All right.
Right. So then there's the question of the ports too. So there's the other sort of quirk to that is local, right? And again, the question of local politics and how that affects all of these other institutions. So those two sort of overarching legal conundrums that continue to be a problem in this relief effort. And then the question that I'm also left with, and one that maybe seems less pressing, is what happens with Promesa, which was passed in 2016 and sort of reinstituted a very traditional form of colonial control on the island. And maybe Eduardo can speak to. I haven't heard much about Promesa since the hurricane, but I assume it's lurking, right? And it will be the tool that I think is used to sort of speed up some of what Carlos was talking about in terms of disaster capitalism and development. And the tweets that Trump sent out a couple of days ago, weeks ago now, about the debt not being forgiven, I think point to the relevance of Promesa still, and how much it will be a force in the redevelopment and the moving forward in terms of rebuilding on the island. So again, a colonial sort of structure that will be the guiding principle for how we move forward in redevelopment. I don't want to take up too much more time because we don't have that much more time, but I'm happy to sort of talk more about law and where we're at in Q&A. Thank you so much.
Our next speaker is Josiana Arroyo Martinez. She's a professor of Latin American and Caribbean Literatures and Cultures in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese and at the Walker Center of African American Studies. Her research interests center on Latin American and Caribbean literature and cultures, Luso-Brazilian literatures and cultures, the relationship between literature, ethnographic, and sociological discourses in Latin America for diasporic literatures and cultures, gender sexuality in colonial and post-colonial societies. She's currently working on a project on virtual curriculum bodies, which explores the relationship between racialized bodies, media technologies, and globalization in contemporary Caribbean societies, and she'll be talking about the media coverage of the crisis in Puerto Rico.
Well, thank you for being here. You're being a very patient public. Thank you, Cesar, for making this possible, and thank you to Jeannie Burnett, the director of Lilas, and to Paloma Diaz for her will and organization. So I'm going to read to make this quickly. First came the darkness, and a sense of desperate anxiety exposed from friends and family members started to disappear from my feed. The day Maria hit, I lost contact with my sister and her family at 4 a.m. Then, for 4 or 5 days, I was not able to communicate with my immediate family members. As I realized later, I was one of the lucky ones, as many were incommunicated for weeks or for a long month, and some still are. As images of the devastation that Hurricane Maria left in the island started to emerge, as well as news from the ground, a desfase between what was happening there and the knowledge of information was abysmal. Puerto Ricans were completely incommunicated as all phones, electricity, etc. and power went down. Diaspora Puerto Ricans became a source for their families on the island. Social media, when the signal will come, will help island Puerto Ricans with information, images, and coverage of the crisis abroad. For the first time, Puerto Rico was on the local primetime news in CNN and MSNBC. The humiliation and fiasco of Trump's the paper towel episode and Pence's visits, his bipolar tweets, the inefficiency of the colonial government, as well as the grim reality described by the governor of San Juan, Carmen Yulín Cruz, and correspondents on the ground like David Bagnot, put us on the radar. A few weeks later, as phone signals were coming back, particularly from Red Claro and AT&T, the voices on individual and collective rescue missions from the ground, cleaning brigades, and other independent journalistic sources help us with news. The colonial local press has been praising the efforts of FEMA and covering up for the inept bureaucracy and the stall and pillage of resources sent to help those in need. It has also manipulated the number of beds on the ground in houses and hospitals, making of social media networks, Twitter and Facebook Live, as well as channels of such as Periodismo Independiente or Periodismo Investigativo, our only source of trusted news. Hurricanes Irma and Maria are the largest natural disasters covered by social media in Cuba and Puerto Rico. The first was the Haiti's earthquake of 2010. As it has happened with Haiti, photography of what could be described as iconic images has been a source of important information on the aftermath of the disaster. Photographies of impacted bodies or nature set a new standard for time, space, color, and also suffering. Puerto Rico's green mountains were now brown, faces were now distressed. In Havana, iconic images presented bodies in what Benítez Rojo has described as la cierta manera, the Caribbean peoples react to chaos. A group of 4 men play dominoes in a flooded street in Havana in the aftermath of Hurricane Irma. A group of neighbors stay close by watching the game. Others are cleaning debris. The water covers their feet and half of their bodies. They're literally submerged in what appears to be a sea of water. The moment I saw this picture emerge in my feed, I thought as the domino saying, Capicua, they say in Cuba, Capicu, they say in Puerto Rico, which describes the final domino piece that has a double number, one that wins in both sides. Another expression in Cuba, as you're getting more pieces and winning, is paradoxically agua. These men's faces are not looking into the camera. Good domino players only look at the fichas and to the eyes of the opponents. To intimidate the opponent is one of the master secrets of the game. In the larger frame picture, we observe several men picking up pieces of debris from the water from what was probably furniture. This picture created lots of debate in the online community. Later, it was discovered that the two groups, those who were cleaning debris and those who were playing, were related, as the domino game was a way of taking time out of the devastation and relaxing in between the recovery and cleaning effort. This image created a heated debate in social media, as well as others that showed that what it felt to be like a celebration or a sense of novelty in the wake of disaster. Some memes created outrage, particularly this one, which was apparently authored by online tours. Owned by Javier Leal Estebanes, the son of Eusebio Leal, historian and architect of Havana Vieja, Online Tours has offices in Old Havana, Barcelona, Madrid, and Las Palmas de Gran Canaria. The manipulation of these images by the same elites that are so close to the regime is not surprising. And as you see the image, if you can read it, it says, hasta que se seque el malecón. Cubans celebrate hasta que se seque el malecón, which is like a line from a very famous, well, not too famous reggaeton song by Jacob Forever. We can see similar manipulations from the uses of popular culture and black-brown bodies in los especiales, for example, if we think of Banco Popular de Puerto Rico. The assumption that black poor bodies do not suffer or are so resilient that they're able to celebrate life in the most dire circumstances was a dictum that was at the heart of slave codes all over the Americas. We're talking about bodies subjected to misery, but also about different concept of time, or an incident that disrupts the landscape. Benitez Rojo quote, de cierta manera, is not necessarily then about identity, but more about a will to live and survive in certain temporal dimensions, the ones that relate to chaos and continuity. This human condition gets problematized when black bodies are read as the source of energy of this continuity. Iconic images have a frame, and if taken in historical continuous, arrive at a circular complexity. Puerto Rico's archipelago in many areas underwater has shifted the historical and human geography in the island. The island pre-Maria is not the one that we left or the one that many of us will encounter when we come back. Images from the disaster zone still coming out appear to be more present for diaspora Puerto Ricans than for people on the mainland. Again, the parallel with Cuba is eerie, as if both islands, again, are mirrors of each other. In this photo in Puerto Rico, taken by photographer Ricardo Arduengo, we see a man looking at a point in space in what seems to be a house, his house, to something that is happening beyond his comprehension. Maybe a wall has fallen or something has flooded. The action let us know that he's moving away to save himself. He has a rooster in his hand, and he's holding his most precious possession. Friend, companion, prized possession, but also ganancia, the rooster represents a possibility for the future. We can call this image gallo de pelea, as the binary human animal are one in this fight for survival. In the second picture taken in the town of Caguas, the aerial caption takes a look at some children that are sweeping or collecting tree branches from a street. Play, as with the dominoes picture, is also present, as well as deep concentration. A younger kid is being entertained by a young girl in the background. A Tonka toy truck appears in the middle of the frame. Close by, a boy is holding a red plastic shovel. This photo by Sudelia Sanchez, which I can call Abriendo Caminos, was circulated in social media to reveal a form of maturity, hope, and possibility in the daily struggle. Like little Elewas, they play and work at the crossroads. As the media visibility of Puerto Ricans and other insular Caribbean peoples urges us to think of the plight of vulnerability in the face of the most dire circumstances, hunger, thirst, illness, and death, it is important to keep other horizons, those of solidarity from the ground up, sociability, and the political as main bridges of communication. Puerto Ricans are in front of two failed models, a failed state and a colonial condition vis-a-vis the U.S. decaying empire. The long historical reality of the colonial condition of Puerto Rico, as well as the expendability of its lives and citizens, is a humanitarian concern. We matter not because we are American citizens, but because we are human beings. In your aim to help and keeping the channels of communication open with your loved ones, please share information with them. And sometimes that's what they want, to hear, about what's going on. But also learn to listen, as anxiety, depression, and other post-traumatic disorders are taking a toll in the population and our loved ones. Also, we in the diaspora are feeling hopeless as we try to help with all their needs as much as we can. Sharing information is one way to help, but remaining connected in heart and solidarity is what will keep us stronger. To share the power of the image and remain at heart and voice is the goals of communication is to enable new political futures, would be to seek a utopia in itself. It is in this assertion of these political futures, and that is the ones of decolonization, those that make of life a priority, that I seek your help today. From the institution, from you, and from those who are here, do not abandon us. Thank you.
Thank you, Josiane. Our last speaker is James K. Galbraith. He holds the Lloyd M. Benson Chair in Government Business Relations at the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs and a professorship in government at UT. He chaired the Board of Economists for Peace and Security from 1996 to 2016 and directs the University of Texas Equality Project. He was Executive Director of the Joint Economic Committee of the United States Congress in the early 90s. From 1993 to 1997, he served as Chief Executive Advisor to China's State Planning Commission for Macroeconomic Reform, and in the first half of 2015, he served as informal counselor to Yanis Varoufakis, the Greek Minister of Finance. In 1916, he advised the presidential campaign of Senator Bernie Sanders.
Thanks very much. And let me not pretend to any deep expertise on Puerto Rico. I'm here at the invitation of the organizers, and because in situations like this, solidarity is a duty. And I will confine myself to a brief recitation of the facts as I understand them. I believe the broad outlines of the economic situation before Irma and Maria are not that mysterious. Up until 1996, the Puerto Rican economy functioned under a regime of tax concessions which were phased out over 10 years, eroding the industrial and tax base. Government met the deficit by borrowing, which then redoubled when the economy fell into recession in 2006, not surprising given the state of the United States and global economy from that year forward. And that was a recession from which the Puerto Rican economy never exited. Puerto Rico has therefore existed for a decade or even two as a pawn of banks and bond investors, with defaults beginning in 2015 and a quasi-bankruptcy procedure underway since May. The rough parameters of the debt situation is the debt is around 70 billion, not including 50 billion in pension obligations. The total comes to about 68% of GDP, which would not be that extreme in a situation in which the debt was held internally, but of course it isn't. It's held by external investors in currency that has to be paid essentially from the current account. And this is in a situation in which $7.5 billion deficit was expected in 2017 before the hurricanes, and a decline in GDP was expected that was on the order of 17%. The debate amongst economists over Puerto Rico has been between the fantasy world of some economists who argue that even with draconian spending cuts and tax increases, economic recovery would occur in any event, and the real world represented by Joe Stiglitz and Martin Guzman, who understood that it would not. The legal variance from municipal bankruptcy, under which most cities in the United States function, lies in an oversight board unduly weighted toward bond investors, and both deaf and blind with respect to the need for public services and for a growth development strategy that can actually function. And absent those things, in any event, their only solutions for Puerto Ricans are very dire poverty, which has already been described, and or immigration. The hurricanes have, of course, clarified the question. The tax base, for practical purposes, I think it's fair to say, no longer exists. The debt, which could not be repaid before, certainly cannot be repaid now. President Trump himself declared on October 3rd that, quote, "They owe a lot of money to your friends on Wall Street. We're going to have to wipe that out." That was a sensible statement, although it was immediately repudiated by Trump's own director of the Office of Management and Budget, Mike Mulvaney. Most of the time, I'm glad that this president does not control his own administration, but there are moments when I wish that he did. Going forward, the battle will be over the question of new loans versus grants and debt cancellation. The basic principle here, which also should have applied to Greece in 2010 and many other situations, is that you don't make loans to a bankrupt. To do so is to just deepen the trap. It is to increase the gravity of the disaster capitalism, which only a program of cancellation and grant assistance is going to have any possibility of allowing for the prospect of redevelopment under the present situation. And if the issue is not resolved soon, and perhaps even in any case, citizens of Puerto Rico will really have no choice but to emigrate, as many have done in the past.
Thank you.